Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the frozen heart of Manitoba. Through forgotten corners of the Canadian prairies, isolated small towns surrounded by endless forests, and lonely highways where help does not reach for miles. Hidden within these quiet communities are 7 of the most disturbing encounters ever reported, each one darker, stranger, and more terrifying than the last. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Manitoba, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened in the winter of 2017 in a tiny farming town about an hour outside Winnipeg, Manitoba. If you've never seen prairie winters, it's hard to explain just how empty everything feels. Endless fields, long frozen roads, and at night, nothing but wind and darkness. Back then, I worked the night shift at a grain elevator on the edge of town. My job was simple: monitor the equipment, log truck deliveries, and keep an eye on the property until morning. Most nights were painfully quiet. The only sounds were the creaking metal of the elevator and the wind blowing snow across the fields. But one night in February, something changed. At around 1:17 a.m., while I was inside the control room, I heard a loud metallic bang echo outside. At first, I assumed it was the wind knocking something loose. But then it happened again. And that's when I checked the security cameras. What I saw on the screen still keeps me awake at night. The grain elevator had 4 exterior cameras, one facing the road, one on the loading platform, one behind the storage bins, and one covering the parking lot. When I switched to the rear camera, I expected to see a loose metal sheet or maybe a raccoon knocking something over. Instead, I saw something standing near the grain bins. At first, I thought it was a person. The shape was tall, thin, and motionless. But something about it looked wrong. The figure stood unnaturally still in the blowing snow, its outline barely visible under the yellow security light. No coat, no hat. Just a tall shape staring directly toward the building. I grabbed the radio and called out through the loudspeaker outside. "Hello. This is private property. You need to leave." The figure didn't move, didn't react, didn't even shift in the wind. And then slowly, the camera flickered. For just a second, the screen glitched. And when the image came back, the figure was closer to the building. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting at the grainy camera feed. The figure that had been standing near the far grain bin was now nearly halfway across the open yard. The distance between those 2 spots was at least 40 feet. And the strange part was, I hadn't seen it move. The snowstorm outside was getting heavier, thick flakes blowing sideways across the cameras. It made everything look distorted and unreal. I told myself that was the reason the figure looked so strange. Still, something about the way it stood bothered me. Its arms hung too long, its shoulders looked unnaturally narrow, and its head tilted slightly to the side like it was studying the building. My heart started beating a little faster. I picked up the radio again and spoke into the outside speaker. "Listen, whoever you are, you need to leave. I'm calling the police." The figure didn't run, didn't turn around. Instead, it took one slow step toward the elevator door. That single step made the situation feel suddenly real. Before that moment, I had been convincing myself it was probably just some drunk guy wandering through the property. Small towns get their share of weird late-night visitors, but nobody moves like that. The step looked stiff, unnatural, almost mechanical. I stood up from my chair and walked to the window overlooking the yard. The glass was fogged from the heater inside, so I wiped it with my sleeve and stared into the darkness. At first, I couldn't see anything, just snow blowing under the floodlights. Then, a shape moved near the grain bins. Even from that distance, I could tell it was taller than any normal person, at least 7 feet, maybe more. And it wasn't wearing winter clothing. In Manitoba winter, that should have been impossible. The temperature that night was around minus 28 degrees Celsius. No one could survive outside like that. Then suddenly, the outside motion sensor lights shut off, and the entire yard went completely dark. When the yard lights went out, the control room suddenly felt much smaller. The only light left came from the glowing monitors in front of me, casting pale blue reflections across the walls. Outside the window, the world had become a black void filled with blowing snow. My first thought was that the storm had knocked out the motion sensors, but the equipment panel beside me showed no power failure. Everything was still running, which meant something had triggered the shutdown manually. My stomach tightened. I quickly switched through the security cameras again, trying to locate the figure. The road camera showed nothing but drifting snow. The parking lot was empty. Then I opened the rear yard camera again. For a few seconds, the screen showed only darkness. Then the camera adjusted to the low light, and suddenly, the figure appeared again. But now it was standing directly in front of the elevator door, so close that the security light from above illuminated its outline. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, and its head slowly turned upward, as if it knew I was watching. When the yard lights went out, the control room suddenly felt much smaller. The only light left came from the glowing monitors in front of me, casting pale blue reflections across the walls. Outside the window, the world had become a black void filled with blowing snow. My first thought was that the storm had knocked out the motion sensors, but the equipment panel beside me showed no power failure. Everything was still running, which meant something had triggered the shutdown manually. My stomach tightened. I quickly switched through the security cameras again, trying to locate the figure. The road camera showed nothing but drifting snow. The parking lot was empty. Then I opened the rear yard camera again. For a few seconds, the screen showed only darkness. Then the camera adjusted to the low light, and suddenly, the figure appeared again. But now it was standing directly in front of the elevator door, so close that the security light from above illuminated its outline. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, and its head slowly turned upward, as if it knew I was watching. The scraping sound was unbearable. At first it was faint, like nails lightly touching metal. But as the creature continued dragging its fingers down the door, the sound became louder, sharper, echoing through the hollow structure of the elevator. It was the kind of sound that crawls into your head and refuses to leave. I stepped away from the monitors and looked toward the main entrance door at the far end of the control room hallway. That door was made of thick steel and usually locked from the inside during night shifts. Still, the idea of something standing right outside it made my stomach twist. The scraping suddenly stopped. For several seconds, the entire building went silent again. Then the door handle moved, just slightly at first. A slow metallic rattle echoed down the hallway. I froze where I stood, staring at the door. The handle turned again. Whoever, or whatever, was outside was now trying to open the elevator door. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knew that door was locked. I had checked it earlier in the night like I always did. but the handle kept turning slowly, back and forth, as if something outside was testing the mechanism. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, heavy thuds against the steel door. Thud, thud, thud. The sound vibrated through the hallway walls. No human could knock that hard without hurting their hand. I forced myself to move back toward the security monitors, my legs feeling strangely weak. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe a drunk person had wandered onto the property. But when I looked back at the rear camera feed, my blood ran cold. The creature was no longer standing outside the door. The yard behind the elevator was completely empty, which meant only one thing. Whatever had been on that camera was now standing right outside the entrance. I stood frozen in the control room, staring down the dark hallway toward the steel entrance door. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed felt even worse. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the door handle moved again. This time, it turned harder. The metal rattled loudly, as if something outside was applying more pressure. I could hear the mechanism inside the lock grinding against the force. My breathing became shallow. The only thing separating me from whatever was out there was that thick steel door and a simple deadbolt. Then came another noise. Not knocking, not scraping, breathing. A slow, heavy inhale followed by a long exhale. It was muffled through the metal, but unmistakable. Something was standing directly on the other side of that door, breathing like an animal that had just finished a long run. I slowly backed away from the hallway, and then suddenly, the power inside the building flickered. The monitors went black for 2 seconds. When the screens came back on, every camera feed showed nothing but static. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. The second the cameras went to static, instinct took over. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and the radio from the desk and ran for the back emergency exit that led to the parking lot. The hallway behind me remained silent. No footsteps, no knocking. Just the distant sound of wind pushing snow against the metal walls. When I reached the exit door, I shoved it open and ran across the frozen parking lot toward my truck. The cold air hit my lungs like knives, but I didn't stop moving. I jumped inside the truck and locked the doors immediately. Then I looked back at the grain elevator. For a moment, everything looked normal. The snowstorm, the quiet yard, the tall, dark building. Then, one of the upper windows lit up briefly from inside, and I saw a tall, thin silhouette standing behind the glass, watching me. The police searched the building the next morning. They found no footprints in the snow, and no sign that anyone or anything had ever been there. But I know what I saw, and whatever stood outside that elevator that night eventually found a way inside. My name is Lucas Harper, and this happened in the fall of 2019 in a tiny farming community about 30 minutes outside Brandon, Manitoba. If you've ever driven through that part of the province, you know how quiet it gets once you leave the main highways. Long stretches of empty road, scattered houses miles apart, and fields that seem to go on forever. Back then, I worked for a small local company that bought and renovated abandoned farmhouses before selling them again. Most of the properties were old, run-down buildings that families had left decades ago. Usually the job was simple: clean the place out, fix the wiring, repair the roof. But one property on Hollow Creek Road was different. The house had been sitting empty since the early 1990s after the last owner died. According to the paperwork, the place had no living relatives left, which meant it had slowly fallen apart for almost 30 years. When I first saw it, I remember thinking the house looked wrong somehow. And I didn't even know about the basement yet. The first day I went out to inspect the house, I brought my coworker, Evan, with me. We had done dozens of these renovation jobs together, so neither of us expected anything unusual. The property sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, surrounded by tall, dead grass and rusting farm equipment. The house itself was 2 stories tall, leaning slightly to one side like it had been slowly sinking into the ground. As soon as we stepped inside, the smell hit us. Old wood, dust, and something else. Something damp and sour. Evan wrinkled his nose immediately. "Basement's probably flooded," he muttered. That seemed like a reasonable explanation. The living room was filled with broken furniture and collapsed shelves, but nothing out of the ordinary for an abandoned place. The kitchen cabinets hung open, and mouse droppings covered the counters. Then we found the basement door. It was in the hallway near the back of the house. Thick wood, heavy lock, and scratched deeply across the surface were dozens of long claw marks. Evan crouched down in front of the basement door and ran his fingers along the scratches. They were deep, much deeper than something like a raccoon or a dog could make. The wood around them had splintered outward, as if something had clawed from the inside, trying to get out. That thought immediately made me uncomfortable. "Probably just animals," Evan said, though his voice didn't sound very convincing. The lock on the door was old and rusted, but it wasn't broken. That meant someone had intentionally sealed the basement at some point. I remember glancing down the hallway toward the empty living room. The house was silent. Too silent. Finally, Evan stood up and pulled a small crowbar from his tool bag. "Well," he said, forcing a grin, "guess we'll find out." The lock snapped with a loud crack after only a few seconds. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Evan slowly pulled the door open. Cold air immediately rushed out from the darkness below. And with it came that same rotten, sour smell. Only much stronger now. The staircase leading down into the basement was narrow and steep, with wooden steps that creaked under even the slightest pressure. Evan clicked on his flashlight and aimed the beam downward. The light disappeared into darkness before reaching the bottom. "Looks pretty deep," he muttered. I grabbed another flashlight from my bag, and together we stepped onto the stairs. Each step groaned loudly beneath our boots, echoing through the hollow space below. The air grew colder as we descended, and that foul smell became almost unbearable. About halfway down, my flashlight beam finally reached the basement floor. That's when I noticed something strange. The ground wasn't concrete like most farm basements. It was bare dirt, uneven, disturbed in several places like it had been dug up many times. When we reached the bottom, Evan swept his flashlight across the room. At first, it looked empty. Then the beam stopped on something in the corner. A large wooden hatch built directly into the dirt floor, and it was locked from the outside. Evan slowly walked closer to the hatch while I stayed near the bottom of the stairs, scanning the basement with my flashlight. The place felt wrong. The air was thick and damp, and the dirt floor looked like it had been disturbed many times over the years. Small piles of loose soil were scattered around the room, and strange grooves ran across the ground as if something heavy had been dragged through it repeatedly. Why would someone build another door inside a basement? I asked quietly. Evan didn't answer right away. He was crouched beside the hatch, brushing dirt away from the metal latch. The wood looked old but surprisingly strong, reinforced with rusted iron bars. "It's locked from up here," he said slowly, "which means whatever's down there wasn't meant to get out." That statement sent a cold shiver through my spine. Then Evan suddenly froze. "What?" I asked. He pointed his flashlight toward the center of the hatch. Carved deeply into the wood were several long scratches, exactly like the ones on the basement door upstairs. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We both just stared at the scratches carved into the hatch. They looked fresh compared to the ones upstairs, the wood around them lighter and splintered. Maybe the previous owner kept animals down here, Evans said after a moment. But even he didn't sound convinced. The scratches were too long, too deep, and spaced too far apart to belong to anything normal. Evans slowly reached for the metal latch. "You really want to open that?" I asked. He shrugged nervously. "We're supposed to inspect the property. That includes whatever's down there." The latch groaned loudly as he lifted it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, something moved beneath the hatch. Not a loud movement, just a faint scraping sound, like something slowly dragging across dirt directly under our feet. Evan and I locked eyes. And then the hatch shook once. From the inside, the scraping sound grew louder, deliberate, like claws digging into the dirt just beneath the hatch. My stomach churned, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing straight up. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity and the job kept me rooted to the spot. Evan's hand hovered over the latch, trembling slightly. His flashlight beam quivered as he shone it over the surface of the hatch. The scratches looked fresh now, deeper than before, almost as if something had been trying to push its way up. The faint scraping continued, coming in slow, deliberate bursts, echoing slightly off the basement walls. "Lucas, maybe we shouldn't," Evan whispered, voice tight. But before I could respond, the hatch creaked open slightly on its own, just a few inches. And then silence fell. Thick, suffocating silence, as if the basement itself was holding its breath. I leaned closer, shining my flashlight into the small gap. The darkness beneath the hatch seemed alive. Something moved, shifting slightly, just out of clear sight. Then it happened. A long, guttural growl echoed from below, vibrating through the floor and sending dust motes into the air. My flashlight wavered in my hands, and Evan stumbled back a step, knocking over a broken chair. The sound of the growl was unnatural, low, deliberate, and filled with intent. From beneath the hatch came a wet scraping sound, like nails dragging through mud. It moved closer, slow but undeniable, tracing along the edge of the hatch. The faintest movement peeked through the crack, dark shapes writhing in ways that defied human anatomy. Something was down there, pressing against the hatch, testing its strength. I felt my throat tighten. Every rational thought fled. I wanted to run, but my body refused. Evan whispered, almost inaudibly, "We should have left yesterday." Then, just as suddenly as it started, the scratching stopped. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The hatch remained slightly open, the darkness beneath swallowing any sense of safety. My flashlight flickered again, and I could swear I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back from the abyss. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen, staring at that hatch. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but fear kept me locked in place. Evan finally whispered, "We have to see what it is, or we'll never know." I shook my head, unable to speak. But before I could stop him, Evan crouched down and pried the hatch fully open. The beam of his flashlight fell into the darkness below, illuminating a small chamber dug into the dirt. The walls were rough, but the floor was covered in deep gouges, as if something had scraped and clawed at it relentlessly. Dark stains streaked the soil, almost black in the flashlight's glow. Then I saw it. A shape hunched in the corner, low to the ground, massive, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its head lifted slowly, and the hollow, glowing eyes met ours. A wet, guttural growl escaped from deep within it. My stomach dropped. That's when I realized this was no animal. This was something else. Something that had lived here, underground, unseen for decades. The creature moved suddenly, and the sound of its claws scraping the dirt made the room vibrate. It was fast, unnaturally fast. And before we could react, it leapt toward the hatch opening, only stopping inches from us. Its glowing eyes reflected in our flashlights, and its wet, ragged breath filled the basement. Evan stumbled back and hit the wall. I grabbed him, pulling him toward the stairs. The creature didn't follow immediately, but the sound of it scratching and growling behind us echoed like thunder through the basement. We didn't look back. Every step we took sounded like the floor was collapsing beneath us. When we finally burst through the front door into the cold Manitoba night, I realized our flashlights had gone dead. The darkness outside was nearly complete. The house loomed behind us, silent again, but I could feel eyes on us. Something had followed us, watching. We never returned to that house. The property was sold to new owners who renovated it. But I've heard rumors that strange noises still come from the basement, and that the hatch below Hollow Creek Road remains locked from the inside. I haven't forgotten those eyes. I don't think I ever will. My name is Samantha Reed, and this happened during the summer of 2018 in a quiet Manitoba town called Nipawa. The town is small, just a few streets, a handful of shops, and long stretches of prairie that stretch farther than the eye can see. On the surface, it's peaceful. Friendly neighbors, kids riding bikes, dogs barking in yards. But sometimes, when the sun goes down and the wind blows across the open fields, it's easy to forget that even the quietest towns hide secrets. I was staying at my grandparents' house for the summer. It's an old brick home at the end of Prairie Lane, a road that barely sees traffic. Most nights, I'd sit on the porch reading until late, enjoying the breeze. But one evening, something felt off. The shadows on the lane seemed too dark, stretching across the fields in ways that didn't match the streetlights. And there was a stillness, like the world had paused. That night, I wasn't alone. I would soon realize something, or someone, was watching from the darkness beyond the fields. It started with a sound, soft at first, almost like someone walking through the grass beside the road. I froze on the porch, straining to hear over the chirping crickets and distant hum of a passing car. At first, I thought it might be a raccoon or a stray dog, but the rhythm was wrong. It was deliberate, slow, watching. I stood and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen. The beam cut across the lane and the edge of the fields, but nothing was there. The tall prairie grass swayed in the wind, but I could swear I saw something moving against it, keeping pace with me. My heart started pounding, and I debated going back inside. But curiosity, or maybe fear itself, kept me rooted to the spot. I tried calling my grandparents, but the phone seemed to die in my hand. That's when I realized something was following me, staying just beyond the reach of the light. A dark figure, too tall to be human, blending into the shadows along Prairie Lane. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles turning white. Every instinct told me to run inside, slam the door, and never look back. But something kept me rooted. The figure in the grass didn't move toward me, at least not yet. It just stood, waiting. Its outline was humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs too thin, and a head that seemed slightly too large for its body. The crickets suddenly fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the rustling of the tall grass, as if whatever was out there was gliding rather than walking. I tried calling out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky, fragile, swallowed by the night. The figure didn't answer. It tilted its head slightly, almost like it was studying me. And for a brief moment, I could swear its glowing eyes reflected a faint light from somewhere deep within the darkness. I stumbled back a step, my flashlight beams shaking with my hands. That's when I realized it was closer than I thought. I turned to run toward the porch, heart hammering, but my legs felt heavy, almost stuck. The figure moved, or rather, shifted. I couldn't see the motion clearly, just a dark blur in the grass that had grown closer in the split second I looked away. Panic surged through me as the night seemed to stretch unnaturally around me. Every shadow suddenly felt alive, every rustle in the field a threat. I stumbled over the uneven ground, flashlight dropping low. Its beam caught a glimpse of the figure again. It wasn't walking, it was gliding silently, unnaturally fast across the lawn toward the edge of the porch. I froze, knowing that if it reached the house, I didn't stand a chance. Then, as I reached for the door handle, the figure stopped abruptly. A long, low hiss echoed from the fields, almost human but far too guttural to belong to a person. My breath caught. The hair on my arms stood on end. Somehow, I knew it was deciding whether I was worth following. I fumbled with the door handle, finally yanking it open, and stumbled inside. The warmth of the house hit me like a wave, but I didn't dare turn my back. Through the window, I could see the figure standing at the edge of the porch light, motionless, almost watching. The air felt heavy, like it carried a weight I couldn't describe. I ran to the living room and grabbed a chair, holding it in front of the door like a weapon. My mind raced, thinking about every horror story I'd ever heard growing up. Nothing, however, prepared me for the way those eyes seemed to follow my every move. Glowing faintly in the dark, I whispered my name out loud, hoping to remind myself I was real, alive. Suddenly, a long shadow stretched across the porch, moving unnaturally fast. It reached the far corner, then disappeared into the darkness of the tall grass. The hair on my arms stood on end. It wasn't gone. It had just stepped back into the night, waiting. And I knew it wasn't leaving without a purpose. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Every creak of the old wooden floor sounded like footsteps from the figure outside. The wind picked up, rustling the prairie grass, creating phantom shapes in the window light. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. But the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Then I heard it. A soft thump against the side of the house, almost like fingernails tapping on the brick. My stomach dropped. The figure had moved silently along the edge of the porch, staying just out of direct sight, testing me. I gripped the chair tighter, raising it instinctively, though I knew it wouldn't help if it came inside. A low, guttural hiss echoed from somewhere beyond the grass. The shadows shifted again, faster this time, and I could see its elongated arms stretch briefly into the faint glow of the porch light. Its form flickered like a shadow caught between dimensions, impossibly tall and impossibly thin, as if the night itself had taken shape. The thumping against the side of the house became louder, sharper, more deliberate. Each impact made the walls vibrate beneath my fingers. My chest felt tight, and I could hardly breathe. I tried to call out again, but my voice caught in my throat. Whoever or whatever was out there knew I could hear it, and it was playing with me. Suddenly, the porch light flickered, dimming and then brightening. In that instant, I saw it. Fully, just for a fraction of a second. The figure had stepped out of the grass, revealing a grotesque form, impossibly thin with arms that seemed to drag along the ground. Its glowing eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, and its elongated fingers flexed as if testing the air. The wind carried a low, wet hiss that sent a shiver down my spine. I stumbled back toward the kitchen, tripping over a rug, and the figure paused for a heartbeat, then vanished into the darkness beyond the porch. But I knew it hadn't gone. It was waiting, patient and deliberate, in the night just beyond my reach. I couldn't stay still. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I also knew I couldn't leave the house unlocked. The figure might follow. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, but the battery was dead. My flashlight flickered in the corner of the room, casting long shadows across the walls. Then I heard it, a soft scraping along the siding, moving slowly, deliberate. My heart pounded in my ears. The figure wasn't outside the porch anymore. It was moving around the house, keeping just out of sight. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible, but I knew invisibility didn't matter. A low hiss followed by a subtle scratching echoed near the kitchen window. My stomach churned. I realized the figure was tracking my every movement, anticipating my next step. The night outside felt alive, and every shadow became a threat. I had no weapons, no escape route, only the feeling that the darkness itself had taken shape and was ready to strike at the first mistake. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to act. Heart hammering, I grabbed the porch door handle and yanked it open, stepping out into the cold Manitoba night. The wind cut through me like knives, and the tall prairie grass swayed eerily under the faint light of the porch. The figure was nowhere in plain sight. Then I saw it, just beyond the tree line, its eyes glowing faintly, reflecting the dim light. The elongated limbs moved unnaturally, gliding over the ground without bending at the knees. I froze, unable to breathe, as it slowly tilted its head, watching me. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs felt paralyzed. A low, guttural hiss escaped its throat, and the air seemed to thrum with tension. I realized this was no ordinary intruder. This was something ancient, something patient, something that had been waiting for an opportunity. I stumbled backward, falling onto the porch steps. The shadow stopped for a moment. Then, in an instant, it vanished into the night, leaving only the rustling grass behind. The next few days were a blur. I didn't leave the house after sunset. Barely even looked out the windows. My grandparents didn't believe me when I told them what I had seen. They thought it was stress or imagination. But I knew the truth. The figure had been real, and it had been watching me, learning, waiting. A week later, I walked along Prairie Lane in the daylight to check on the garden. Everything looked normal, quiet, peaceful, too peaceful. That's when I noticed something in the grass near the tree line. Footprints, but they weren't human. Long, thin impressions, stretched unnaturally, leading straight toward the house. I never saw the figure again in daylight, but at night, the shadows along Prairie Lane always feel wrong. My friends moved on. Townsfolk shrugged off my story. But I haven't forgotten the feeling of those glowing eyes, the way it glided across the prairie, patient and deliberate. Sometimes, when the wind blows across the fields, I swear I can still hear that low hiss in the distance, reminding me the shadow never really leaves. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened in the winter of 2020 in a small Manitoba town called Steinbach. The town itself seems normal, even cozy during the day. Shops lining the streets, kids laughing at school, snow-covered rooftops. But after dark, the outskirts are a different world entirely. long stretches of empty roads, icy fields, and snow-drifted lanes that swallow sound, make it feel as though the world ends just beyond the streetlights. I was 17 at the time, taking the late bus home from a friend's house. The bus route passes through the outskirts of town, stopping at a small, abandoned bus shelter along Hollow Pines Road. Locals call it the Forgotten Stop, though no one really uses it anymore. That night, the wind was biting, and snowflakes danced across the road like restless spirits. When the bus slowed to a stop at the shelter, I noticed something strange. A dark figure standing just beyond the bus light, watching, unmoving. It didn't wave or signal for the bus. It just stared. The bus doors hissed open, and I stepped onto the icy pavement, brushing snow off my coat. The figure didn't move. My stomach twisted as I squinted through the falling snow. Its shape was tall, too tall, and thin. The head seemed slightly too large for its body, and its posture was unnaturally rigid, like it wasn't used to bending. I waved cautiously, hoping it would step forward or signal its intentions. Nothing. Just the figure, silent, still and unblinking. My bus driver frowned, muttering something under his breath. But he didn't slow down. "Hurry up, kid," he said. "It's cold." I climbed onto the bus, glancing back one last time. The figure was gone, vanished. No footprints in the snow. Nothing. Just the empty stretch of road and the rustling of pine trees. I shrugged it off, assuming my eyes had played tricks in the snow and dim streetlight. But as the bus drove further along the icy road, I noticed something even stranger. The bus stop itself was gone, replaced by a perfect stretch of snow-covered road where the shelter had been just moments before. The bus rumbled on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every glance out the window made my stomach knot tighter. The road stretched endlessly through icy fields, and the forest along the edges seemed too dark, too silent, as if it were swallowing all sound. I kept looking for the bus stop, half expecting it to appear again. But it never did. When we reached the next stop, a small group of teenagers got on, laughing and talking about school projects. I tried to focus on them, but my mind kept wandering back to that vanished shelter. What had I seen? The figure? The sudden disappearance? It didn't make sense. A soft scratching sound suddenly echoed from the roof of the bus, faint but deliberate. Everyone else seemed oblivious. I froze. The sound came again, this time closer, like something scraping along the metal frame, circling above us. My hands gripped the seat in front of me. I dared not look up, yet my instincts screamed that the figure from Hollow Pines Road hadn't stayed behind. It had followed. I finally risked a glance upward. There, in the dark space between the bus ceiling and the luggage rack, I thought I saw two glowing eyes, small but unmistakable, fixed directly on me. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't large like before. It seemed smaller, almost childlike. But the stare burned into me with an intelligence that chilled me to the bone. I jerked back into my seat, bumping into the teenager beside me. "Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. But I shook my head, trying to appear calm. The eyes disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. The bus drove on, every mile heavier than the last. The road ahead was dark, and the snow made it impossible to see more than a few meters. My mind kept replaying the vanished bus stop and the tall figure waiting in the shadows. Something about that stretch of Hollow Pines Road was alive, and it had marked me that night. By the time we reached the halfway point along Hollow Pines Road, the unease in my chest had grown into pure terror. Every shadow outside the bus seemed to twitch, bend, and stretch unnaturally. I could swear the snow itself moved slightly, like something just beneath the surface was watching us. Then it appeared, just outside the frosted window, a tall, thin figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. The bus headlights cut through the snow and illuminated it fully for the first time. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its posture too rigid, and its head tilted slightly, glowing eyes fixed directly on me. I froze. My breath fogged the glass, and my hands shook uncontrollably. I tried to call the driver's attention, but the words stuck in my throat. The figure didn't move toward the bus. It just waited motionless, like it knew we couldn't leave. The scratching sound returned, this time louder, coming from the metal roof. My heart raced as I realized that whatever it was, it had followed us from the vanished bus stop. Panic finally overtook me. I pressed myself into my seat, trying to make myself invisible. The figure didn't move closer, but it didn't need to. It exuded a presence that froze the entire bus. The scratching noises on the roof continued, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing through the metal frame like a heartbeat. I realized then that everyone else on the bus had no idea. They were laughing, talking, scrolling on their phones, completely oblivious to the terror outside. I was utterly alone in recognizing it. The figure tilted its head again, longer than it should have been, like it was observing, calculating. My mind raced. How could something so unnatural exist here, in the middle of a sleepy Manitoba town? As the bus approached a bend in the road, the creature finally vanished from view, slipping silently into the drifting snow and darkness beyond. The scratching stopped, leaving only the wind and the snowstorm to fill the night. I sank into my seat, trembling, knowing deep down that Hollow Pines Road and that vanishing bus stop was not done with me. The wind howled outside, rattling the bus windows as we continued along the dark stretch of Hollow Pines Road. I couldn't stop glancing through the frost-covered glass, expecting the figure to appear again at any moment. My fingers were white from gripping the edge of the seat, my heart pounding so loud it seemed to echo in the bus itself. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The figure had reappeared, gliding alongside the bus, unnaturally fast, matching our speed without effort. Its elongated limbs stretched and folded in ways that made my stomach turn. The glowing eyes remained fixed on me. I tried to look away, but some instinct kept me staring. Suddenly, the scratching on the roof intensified, more aggressive, more deliberate, like it was tracing a pattern, almost playful, almost mocking. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to flee, yet I was paralyzed with fear. The bus seemed small, trapped, while the night stretched endlessly around us, filled with that cold, inhuman presence that refused to be ignored. The figure darted forward for a moment, coming unnervingly close to the bus windows. I could see details now. Thin, skeletal fingers, skin pale and almost translucent, eyes burning with a cold intelligence. My breath came in short gasps, fogging the glass as my hands trembled uncontrollably. I backed into the aisle, clutching my backpack like a shield. The passengers remained unaware, chatting and laughing, oblivious to the horror just beyond the glass. It was watching me specifically, not the others. I felt an almost physical weight pressing against my chest, like the air itself had turned hostile. The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence fell, but the sense of dread didn't leave. The figure had vanished again, slipping into the snowstorm beyond the bus headlights. But the memory of those glowing eyes burned into my mind. I knew it hadn't gone. It was waiting, patient and deliberate. Perhaps for the next time someone dared step off the bus at Hollow Pines Road. I sank into my seat, cold and shaking, knowing the night was far from over. As the bus neared the end of Hollow Pines Road, the night felt thicker, almost alive. Every shadow outside the frosted windows seemed to stretch toward me, reaching, whispering. My stomach churned. I kept glancing at the forest lining the road, half expecting the figure to emerge again. And every time I saw a shadow move unnaturally, my heart jumped into my throat. Suddenly, a faint tapping echoed from the roof above me. Soft at first, then louder, deliberate, almost like fingers drumming a rhythm I could feel in my bones. The glowing eyes appeared in my peripheral vision once more, now visible through the bus window, watching, assessing, calculating. My pulse raced, and a wave of icy fear swept over me. The bus driver hit a pothole, jolting me forward. I felt something brush against my shoulder, a cold, intangible presence, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. The figure hadn't boarded, yet somehow I could feel its intent, its awareness, as if the snowstorm itself was a conduit for its attention. By the time the bus reached town, the figure had vanished completely into the swirling snow. The scratching on the roof had stopped, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted slightly. But I felt hollow inside, like a part of me had been marked by the darkness. I stepped off the bus, snow crunching beneath my boots, and glanced back at Hollow Pines Road. It was just a quiet stretch of snow and forest under the pale streetlights. No footprints, no trace of the figure, nothing. Yet I knew what I had felt, what had followed me. It wasn't a hallucination, it was real. Years later, I still avoid taking that route after dark. The bus stop on Hollow Pines Road is gone again now, replaced by a stretch of empty, snow-covered road. But sometimes, when the wind howls and the snow drifts rise high, I swear I can feel those glowing eyes watching, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to stop there. Hollow Pines Road never forgets. Neither does the figure. Neither do I. My name is Leah Thompson, and this happened in the summer of 2017 in a small Manitoba town called Beausejour. On the surface, it's charming. A tight-knit community, quiet streets, and endless stretches of forest that surround the town like a green fortress. But the woods that loom beyond the outskirts aren't just trees. They hold something unnatural, something that can't be explained by logic or science. I was out camping with a group of friends near the edge of those woods. We had set up tents beside a small creek just beyond the last street light, and laughter filled the night air. But as darkness fell, the forest seemed to breathe, shifting subtly, and every rustle of leaves felt like a whisper meant only for me. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Then I heard the first scream, high-pitched, guttural, impossible to locate, echoing across the trees. None of my friends reacted, thinking it was an animal or maybe even one of us playing a prank. But deep down, I knew. This scream was something else entirely. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was probably just an owl or a fox. But the screams came again. Closer this time, sharper, more human in tone, yet warped in a way that made my blood run cold. I glanced at my friends, laughing around the campfire, oblivious to the sound. I decided to investigate, moving slowly toward the edge of the tree line. Each step into the forest felt heavier, like the air itself resisted me. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the wind seemed to carry whispers just out of earshot, mimicking voices I knew. Then I saw it, a faint movement between the trees, a dark shape, tall, thin, and twisting unnaturally, gliding just behind the underbrush. It didn't run or walk, it floated. My stomach dropped. I froze, knowing that if I screamed, my friends would never see what I saw. The entity paused, its head tilting in my direction. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting a hunger I could feel rather than see. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to run back to the safety of the campfire, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The shape moved silently through the trees, gliding across the forest floor without disturbing a single leaf. The screams echoed again, louder now, coming from all directions at once, as if the woods themselves were alive and crying out in pain. I took a hesitant step forward, holding my flashlight in front of me. The beam shook violently, catching glimpses of the figure. Its limbs were impossibly long, bending in ways that shouldn't exist, and the head twisted slightly, as if it could rotate 180 degrees. My stomach churned at the sight. The glowing eyes seemed to pierce through me, reading my every fear. Suddenly, the figure vanished behind a dense wall of ferns. I called out for my friends, but my voice sounded fragile, swallowed by the night. That's when I realized the screams weren't just from the woods, they were from the creature itself. I forced myself to move forward, each step crunching softly against fallen leaves. The screams intensified, layering over one another in a cacophony that made my head spin. It was as if the forest itself was alive, manipulating sound to toy with me. I could feel the creature's presence, patient, observing, almost enjoying the fear it provoked. Then I saw it again, partially hidden behind a large pine. This time, it moved closer deliberately, gliding with unnatural speed. Its thin, elongated fingers stretched toward the ground as if testing the terrain, and its glowing eyes were fixed entirely on me. My pulse raced, and a cold sweat ran down my back. I stumbled over a root and fell to the ground, the flashlight rolling a few feet away. Its beam caught the creature again, just for a second, and I could see its twisted, pale form in full. It tilted its head in a way that felt mocking, predatory, and I realized that it wasn't hunting animals. It was hunting me. I scrambled to grab my flashlight and pointed it at the figure, but the beam barely penetrated the dense darkness. The creature paused for a moment, its glowing eyes flicking like fire, as if it were amused. Then it moved closer, gliding over the forest floor, silent except for the low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the trees. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I tried to call my friends again, but the sound of my own voice seemed muffled, absorbed by the woods. The screams echoed again, this time coming from right behind me, though I dared not turn. My instincts screamed to run, yet every step I took forward felt slower, heavier, as if the forest itself resisted me. The creature finally stepped into the flashlight's beam, revealing its twisted, elongated form, skin pale and almost wet-looking. Its head tilted unnaturally, and the glowing eyes burned directly into mine. I realized it was drawing fear from me, feeding off it, and the longer I stayed, the stronger its presence became. I backed away slowly, tripping over roots and loose stones, my flashlight rolling and casting brief flashes across the trees. Every time the light flickered, the figure seemed to shift closer, appearing almost out of thin air, until it was right at the edge of the beam again. My heart pounded, and a cold sweat ran down my spine. The forest itself seemed to react, branches twisting, leaves rustling as if echoing the creature's intent. I could feel its malevolent awareness pressing against my mind, testing my fear, pushing me toward panic. The screams came again, deafening now, overlapping, warped, and impossible to locate. I realized then that my friends were no longer at the campsite. The fire was gone. Only the darkness and the screaming remained. My hands shook violently as I struggled to keep the flashlight steady, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The creature's glowing eyes followed every move, patient, relentless, and impossibly intelligent, as if it had planned this hunt for far longer than I could imagine. The forest seemed to close in around me. Every shadow twisted unnaturally, every gust of wind carried whispers I couldn't understand. The creature's glowing eyes were everywhere at once, flickering between trees, underbrush, and broken patches of moonlight. My flashlight illuminated only fragments of its twisted form, leaving the rest to my imagination, which my mind filled with horrors far worse than reality. I realized I had to move. Staying in one place meant being hunted, so I ran blindly, branches clawing at my clothes, roots tripping me over and over. The screams now followed me, louder, more distorted, overlapping with a deep growl that seemed to vibrate the very earth beneath my feet. Suddenly, it appeared directly in front of me, gliding silently, impossibly fast. Its head tilted, and its glowing eyes bored into mine. I could feel its hunger, its focus entirely on me. My instincts screamed to flee, but the darkness had me trapped, every exit swallowed by the twisted, screaming forest. I stumbled backward, falling into a small hollow in the forest floor. The flashlight skittered across the ground, illuminating a brief glimpse of the creature's skeletal fingers and pale, warped face. Then darkness swallowed it again. My heart pounded uncontrollably, and the screams crescendoed, now merging with the wind, making it impossible to tell where they came from. I tried to focus, forcing myself to crawl toward the faint light of the campsite in the distance, each movement slow and deliberate. The creature followed silently, always just beyond the edge of visibility, teasing me with glimpses, as if to ensure the fear stayed alive. The trees themselves seemed alive, bending and twisting to funnel me deeper into the forest. Then a hand, cold, impossibly thin, brushed my shoulder. I froze, paralyzed. The glowing eyes flashed inches from my face, and I understood. It wanted me terrified, wanted me isolated, wanted me to feel utterly powerless. My mind screamed that this was no ordinary creature, no animal. This was something ancient, patient, and relentless. I forced myself to move, crawling desperately toward the faint glow of the distant campsite. Every movement felt like it took an eternity. The screams now surrounded me completely, bouncing off trees, warping with the wind, like the forest itself had become the creature's mouth. My chest heaved, lungs burning, yet I dared not look directly at the glowing eyes that I felt lingering in my periphery. Suddenly, the creature darted forward, moving with a speed that defied any human understanding. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling over roots and rocks, and ran blindly toward the faint light. Branches whipped my face and hands as the screams reached a fever pitch, cutting through my mind like icy knives. Just as I neared the campsite, the forest fell silent. The glowing eyes vanished. The air grew still, heavy, almost expectant. I collapsed beside the tents, shaking uncontrollably, the screams replaced only by my own ragged breathing. I knew the creature hadn't left, and it was waiting, patient, always watching. I never forgot that night. My friends woke up, none the wiser, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. The fire crackled normally, the forest calm again. But I knew the truth. The screaming woods were alive, and the creature that stalked me was no animal. It was something older, patient and intelligent, feeding on fear and chaos. Even now, years later, I avoid the edge of those woods, especially at night. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I hear faint screams drifting through the trees, too human, too distorted, echoing across the dark expanse. I know it's not just a memory. It's still there, waiting, watching, and listening for the next person foolish enough to wander too close. The screaming woods never forgive. They never forget. And those who enter unprepared may never return, or worse, leave changed forever. I survived, but part of me still belongs to that forest. And I will never forget the pale, glowing eyes that hunted me that summer night in Manitoba. My name is Dylan Harper, and this happened in the winter of 2018, on the outskirts of a small Manitoba town called Stonewall. I had taken a job delivering supplies to a remote farmhouse, isolated in the frozen plains. The town itself felt safe, cozy, and ordinary. But the farther I drove along the snow-covered back roads, the more the world seemed to shrink around me. Trees became skeletal shapes, fences disappeared under drifts of snow, and the silence felt thick enough to suffocate. When I reached the farmhouse, the lights were out, and no smoke rose from the chimney. Something about the place made my stomach knot, an unsettling emptiness that seemed alive. I knocked on the door, announcing myself, but there was no answer. Only the wind stirred, carrying faint whispers that sounded like muffled voices arguing inside. I stepped inside cautiously, and the floorboards creaked under my boots. That's when I realized the house was completely empty, except for a series of footsteps that led toward the basement, though no one was home. I hesitated at the top of the basement stairs, heart pounding. The air was frigid, colder than outside, and carried a metallic, almost decayed smell. Each step downward echoed through the empty house like a warning. The faint whispers grew louder, unintelligible but unmistakably human. I tried calling out, but my voice seemed swallowed by the darkness. The basement was vast, filled with crates, barrels, and forgotten farm tools. Shadows clung to every corner. That's when I noticed a faint movement near the far wall. A dark figure crouched unnaturally low, almost blending into the shadows. Its face was obscured, but I could feel eyes on me, intelligent, patient, and predatory. I stepped back, nearly tripping over a crate. The floor seemed to vibrate slightly, like the house itself was aware of my presence. A low creaking sound echoed from above, though the front door was locked. Whatever lived here, or whatever had been waiting, was not human, and it knew I was alone. I forced myself to take another step into the basement, flashlight trembling in my hands. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel it tracking my every motion, a presence so heavy it seemed to press down on my chest. The air smelled worse now, like old rot mixed with something acrid and metallic. Each breath burned my lungs. Suddenly, the figure shifted, gliding a few feet closer with unnatural speed without making a sound. My flashlight caught just a sliver of its pale, elongated arm before it retreated into the shadows. My pulse raced, and my instincts screamed at me to run. But the basement stairs seemed impossibly far. I realized this wasn't a normal intruder or animal. It was something patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. Then I heard it. A whisper, soft, deliberate, echoing through the concrete walls. Leave, or stay forever. My hands shook so violently, I almost dropped the flashlight. But I couldn't leave. I had to know what I was dealing with. I inched closer to the far wall, every sense screaming that I was being watched, hunted, studied. The whispers continued, unintelligible but layered, almost as if more than one voice spoke in unison, blending with the creaking of the old wooden beams above. The floor beneath me groaned with each step, amplifying the oppressive tension. The figure emerged slightly from the shadows, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Thin, elongated limbs bent at unnatural angles, skin pale and slick, eyes glowing faintly red. Its head tilted in a way that no human head should, and its presence radiated a hunger I could feel in my chest. I stumbled backward, knocking over a barrel. The sound echoed through the basement like a gunshot. The creature froze, then slowly turned its head, glowing eyes fixed on me. I realized I had triggered something, and whatever it was, it didn't intend to let me leave without exacting its due fear. I backed toward the stairs, my flashlight beam trembling with every heartbeat. The creature stayed perfectly still, yet its presence pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, like the air itself had turned hostile. Each creak of the wooden beams above, or crack of ice outside, felt magnified, echoing like a drum of impending doom. The whispers became louder, layered and overlapping, filling the basement with voices that weren't there before. Then it moved, slowly at first, gliding across the basement floor without a sound. Its elongated fingers scraped lightly against the crates, leaving faint streaks in the dust, almost as if it were testing the space, mapping it, anticipating my every move. I froze, paralyzed with fear, knowing any sudden movement could draw its attention fully onto me. The glowing red eyes never left mine. I realized it wasn't just observing. It was feeding on my terror, growing stronger with every second I spent frozen in place. My mind raced. How could something so wrong, so impossible, exist in the middle of a quiet Manitoba farmhouse? I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs. The whispers intensified, overlapping with faint scratching sounds on the walls, echoing through the basement like some hidden, malevolent intelligence moving just out of sight. The creature glided closer, impossibly fast, yet still silent. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but the stairwell felt miles away, and I could feel its presence stretching, coiling around me like a living shadow. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench, gripping it like a lifeline, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The creature paused, tilting its head, eyes glowing brighter. I could sense a deliberate curiosity, an intelligence that made it far more terrifying than any mindless predator. The shadows themselves seemed to bend toward it, the darkness gathering, thickening, suffocating. I backed further, trying to make a run for the door, but the basement seemed to stretch endlessly. The creature's glow followed me with painful precision. The air grew heavier drum of terror I took, each breath a countdown to confrontation. Taunts, I wasn't sure seeming to echo inside my skull rather than the walls. I pressed the wrench tighter in my hands, shining the flashlight toward the far corner. For a moment, the figure froze, its glowing red eyes reflecting off the concrete like molten fire. Then it moved again, faster this time, gliding across the floor without a sound. Its elongated limbs bent at impossible angles, scraping faint scratches into the dust, marking the path it had taken. I realized with a cold, sinking feeling that it wasn't just hunting me. It was toying with me, drawing out my terror, watching every tremor of fear ripple across my body. I tried to run, but the basement seemed to stretch endlessly. Every turn revealed only darkness. Yet I could sense it always a step ahead. My mind screamed, my body shook, and I knew I had to confront it directly or risk being trapped in that silent, suffocating nightmare forever. I swung the wrench blindly toward the creature, more out of desperation than hope. It didn't flinch, didn't react physically, yet the pressure in the air shifted, almost as if my defiance had provoked it. The whispers intensified, overlapping with the faint, irregular creaking of the floorboards, turning the basement into a symphony of horror. Then it advanced, slowly, deliberately, its glowing eyes burning with an intelligence that felt both alien and malevolent. The shadows stretched toward me, coiling like fingers across the floor and walls. I could feel its awareness pressing into my mind, probing my fear, savoring the panic that coursed through me. I backed up until my boots hit the bottom stair. The creature hovered just beyond the flashlight's beam, silent but radiating intent. I realized then that the basement wasn't just a physical trap. It was a psychological one, designed to strip me of courage, to consume my will before the final attack. The only way out was to face it, though every instinct screamed otherwise. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to step forward, swinging the wrench with all my strength toward the creature. The basement seemed to respond. The shadows twisted violently, and the whispers escalated into a high-pitched, discordant chorus that made my ears ring. The figure paused, its glowing red eyes locking on mine as if assessing my courage. Then it lunged, or at least it felt like a lunge. In reality, it moved impossibly fast, gliding silently across the floor and stopping just short of me. Its elongated fingers reached toward my chest, not touching but radiating an intense, suffocating pressure, as if it could crush my very will. My entire body shook uncontrollably, and I realized the fight wasn't physical. It was a battle of fear and resolve. I forced a yell, swinging the wrench one last time, and the creature recoiled, slipping back into the shadows, almost as if I had startled it. Silence returned, heavy, suffocating, but I knew it hadn't left. It was waiting, patient and eternal. I scrambled up the stairs and threw open the front door. The cold Manitoba wind slammed against me, and I stumbled into the snow, gasping for air. I dared not look back at the dark silhouette of the farmhouse. Inside, I could feel it watching, waiting, patiently marking me as its next visitor should I return. Weeks later, I went back to Stonewall, hoping the encounter had been a nightmare. The farmhouse sat quiet and empty, seemingly abandoned, yet the sense of dread never left me. At night, I dream of those glowing red eyes, of the whispers and the shadows that moved with purpose, of the suffocating fear that lived in the basement. The silent farmhouse isn't haunted by spirits. It's inhabited by something older, patient, and far more intelligent than any human mind. It thrives on fear, isolating anyone foolish enough to enter its frozen walls. I survived, but a part of me will always belong to that basement, and I will never forget the red glow that stared into my soul in the silent farmhouse of Manitoba. My name is Emily Carter, and this happened during a summer trip to a small Manitoba town called Whiteshell. I had come with friends to explore a remote lake, famous locally for its clear waters and quiet surroundings. The area was beautiful. Dense forests framed the shoreline, and the sun glittered on the water. But there was something unnerving about the silence. It was too complete, too absolute, as if the world had been muted just for us. We set up camp near the water's edge, joking and laughing, but I kept noticing strange things. The lake had odd ripples that appeared without wind, shadows moving beneath the surface, and sometimes a faint whisper that sounded like a child crying. My friends laughed it off, attributing it to our imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching, waiting, and patient. That night, I woke to find the water unnaturally still, almost glass-like, reflecting the moon in perfect clarity. But then I saw it. A dark shape rising slowly beneath the surface, moving toward the shore where I slept. I froze, my heart pounding, as the shape neared the shore. The water began to ripple unnaturally, each wave perfectly synchronized, almost deliberate. I tried to wake my friends, shaking them, but they were deep in sleep, oblivious to the danger I could feel pressing through the cool night air. The shape emerged partially, long limbs slick with water, skin dark and reflective like oil, and eyes that glowed faintly yellow-green in the moonlight. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, yet I could sense its awareness, studying, calculating, and hunting. My body shook uncontrollably, paralyzed by the mixture of fear and disbelief. I grabbed a nearby stick, holding it like a weapon, but I knew it was meaningless. The entity hovered just at the water's edge, ripples forming around its form like rings of control over the lake. The whispers I had heard earlier intensified, echoing across the trees, distorted voices that seemed to come from the lake itself. I realized then that the water was not just a lake, it was a trap, and we were its prey. I stumbled backward, tripping over a rock and nearly falling into the water. The entity didn't move aggressively, yet the pressure in the air made it impossible to breathe. Its glowing yellow-green eyes were fixed on me, intelligent, patient, and calculating. I realized it wasn't just a creature. It was alive in the water itself, controlling every ripple, every shadow, every reflection. The lake began to shift unnaturally, as though the surface had become liquid glass with a will of its own. Dark shapes rose and fell beneath the water, elongated limbs barely visible, moving in perfect synchronization, almost as if the entity was summoning something far larger than itself. I could hear the whispers more clearly now, twisted, distorted, echoing across the tree line, voices of people who had stared too long into the lake and disappeared. Panic surged through me. My friends were still asleep, completely unaware of the horror unfolding at the water's edge. I realized I had to act fast. I grabbed a small camping lantern and swung it toward the water, hoping to break the creature's concentration or reveal its form. But it only made the shadows ripple faster. The water began to churn violently, rising unnaturally, forming tall, liquid columns that twisted like serpents, each movement purposeful and alive. The entity hovered at the center, controlling the waves, its glowing eyes reflecting off the water like lanterns in a storm. I realized then that it wasn't just stalking me. It was testing my fear, measuring my reaction, learning how to manipulate me. I screamed for my friends, shaking them awake, but they stirred groggily, unable to see what I saw. The water surged closer to the shoreline, creeping like a living being, and I could feel its cold presence brushing against my legs. I backed up, every instinct screaming that standing still was death. The whispers became intelligible, forming words from fractured voices. Join us, beneath, forever. My blood ran cold. I realized the lake had claimed others before me, and the entity had no intention of letting anyone leave unscathed. The serene lake from earlier was a facade hiding unspeakable predation. I stumbled backward onto the snow-covered shore, my heart hammering in my chest. The lake surged unnaturally, the water's surface writhing like a living thing, twisting into shapes that resembled distorted human faces, mouths open in silent screams. The yellow-green glow from the entity's eyes reflected off the water, illuminating each horrifying ripple. I could feel it pushing me, testing my limits, feeding on every ounce of fear I had. My friends finally woke, alarmed by my shouting. They blinked in confusion, seeing only the lake shimmering in moonlight, unaware of the horrors just beneath. I grabbed one of them, shaking them, trying to pull them back to safety. But the shoreline seemed to stretch infinitely, and the entity's influence made each step feel heavier, slower, like walking through thick, invisible molasses. A sudden wave surged violently, slamming toward us. It wasn't just water, it was a physical presence, pushing, attempting to drag us in. I swung a lantern at the water, the glow scattering across the surface, and I realized this entity was clever. patient, and determined to claim another victim. I grabbed my friend's hands and sprinted along the shoreline, trying to escape the lake's pull. Each step felt like wading through thick, invisible currents, as if the water itself extended its reach over the frozen sand and rocks. The whispers intensified, layering over one another, a chorus of torment from previous victims. Join us, forever. I could feel the entity's gaze, weighing our fear, testing our desperation. The glowing eyes darted beneath the surface, following our every movement, while shadows rose along the water's edge, stretching unnaturally, curling like grasping fingers. I could see shapes forming, limbs, torsos, and distorted faces briefly visible before disappearing into the water. My stomach churned. It was hunting us with precision, learning how far it could push. Finally, I spotted the edge of the forest where the ground was firm. Adrenaline surged and we bolted, lungs burning, hearts hammering. Behind us, the water shimmered unnaturally, restless, aware, and patient, as though the lake itself was a predator waiting for the next misstep, its hunger far from satisfied. We plunged into the trees, snow crunching beneath our boots, the lake behind us churning unnaturally. I dared not look back, but I could feel its presence stretching through the darkness, the glowing eyes burning into my mind. The whispers followed us, layered and overlapping, echoing from the lake into the forest. Join us, forever. Stay. Every word carried weight, pulling at my thoughts, testing my sanity. Branches lashed at my face as we ran blindly, the forest twisting in ways that felt unnatural. Shadows stretched along the ground, lengthening toward us, almost like extensions of the lake itself. I could feel the entity manipulating the space, bending perception, feeding on our panic. Finally, we stumbled upon a narrow dirt path leading back to the main road. I grabbed my friends, urging them to run faster, heart hammering, lungs burning. Behind us, the lake's surface glimmered in the moonlight, seemingly calm again. But I knew better. The vanishing lake wasn't done, and the entity's patience meant it would wait forever for its next victims. We reached the road and collapsed against a tree, gasping for air, snow melting on our clothes. My friends were shaken, but still skeptical. None had seen what I saw beneath the water. I tried to explain, but words failed. The forest was silent, except for the distant ripple of the lake, almost imperceptible, yet alive, aware, patient. I couldn't shake the sensation that the water itself had eyes, that the entity followed me with some unseen tether, waiting for me to let my guard down. Every memory of the distorted faces beneath the surface, the glowing yellow-green eyes, and the whispering chorus pressed into my mind. I realized this lake had claimed more than just attention. It had claimed fear, embedding itself in the minds of anyone who stared too long. Even as we drove back to town, I felt its presence lingering behind, a pull I could not explain. The vanishing lake didn't just exist physically, it existed psychologically. A predator in both water and mind, patient, eternal, and hungry. As we drove back toward town, the lake disappeared behind the trees. Yet the memory of it remained vivid and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had followed us, lingering just beyond the headlights, waiting for a misstep. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to pulse with the entity's presence. Every gust of wind carried faint whispers that clawed at my sanity. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion or imagination, but the fear in my chest was too real, too precise. I could almost hear the distorted chorus of voices, mocking, patient, and deliberate, warning me that leaving the lake did not mean escape. It had embedded itself in my mind, in my memories, and I could feel its influence whenever I closed my eyes or let my thoughts drift. That night, I dreamed of the water rising, of yellow-green eyes glowing beneath the surface, and the distorted faces reaching for me. The vanishing lake was no longer a place. It had become a presence I carried within me, eternal and unrelenting. Weeks later, I returned briefly to the lake during daylight, hoping rationality could erase the fear. The water appeared calm, serene, reflecting the sun in a peaceful shimmer. My friends walked beside me, laughing and talking, seemingly unaware of the terror I had witnessed. But I knew better. Beneath the surface, something waited, patient and eternal, watching, waiting for its next prey. I dipped my hand into the water. For a brief instant, I felt it. The entity's presence, cold, intelligent, and invasive, reaching into my mind as if measuring my fear even now. I recoiled, and the water stilled instantly, reflecting the sunlight, hiding the darkness below. I realized then that the vanishing lake wasn't a one-time horror. It was a predator of both body and mind, a place where the line between water and consciousness blurred. Even now, I avoid lakes in Manitoba, always watching the reflections, always aware that somewhere beneath the surface, it waits patiently for the next soul foolish enough to stare too long.